Hello and welcome to a special bonus. I thought it would work better if I had a bonus edition of Around the Mitten with Pastor Chris Laughlin and myself, Pastor James Smith. And I am joined today by a very special guest, Pastor Chris Laughlin. That's what makes it a bonus. So why don't you tell us where you're from and why you're here?
I'm Pastor Chris Laughlin. I serve Emmanuel Lutheran Church in Allegan, Michigan, which is sort of between Kalamazoo and Grand Rapids. And special thanks to Bishop Julia and to Pastor James, who I had this idea and they approved it. I thought I had something to say on this particular part of the Passion narrative. And so I thought I would add my 2 cents, specifically around the phrase, return your sword to its place, for all who take the sword will die by the sword. Um, so yeah, thank you for indulging me in this little bonus reflection. I should also tell you, because it obviously will be relevant, for those of you who don't know, because somebody might be watching who doesn't, that I am an Army Reserve chaplain, and my opinions are my own and do not reflect those of the 1st U.S. Army Support Command, the United States Army Reserve, or the U.S. Army Chaplain Corps.
All right. So disclaimers are stamped, official, ready to go. And I think you wanted to read us this snippet of the Passion because we're all going to hear it on Palm Sunday, assuming you do the full Passion reading. But there's almost so much in there that it kind of gets lost. Uh, so why don't you go ahead and read us the verses that you wanted to talk about with us today?
From Matthew 26, starting at verse 51, suddenly one of those with Jesus put his hand on his sword, drew it, and struck the slave of the high priest, cutting off his ear. Then Jesus said to him, put your sword back into its place, for all who take the sword will die by the sword. Do you think that I cannot appeal to my Father, and he will at once send me more than 12 legions of angels? But how then would the scriptures be fulfilled, which say that it must happen in this way? But all this has taken place so that the scriptures of the prophets may be fulfilled.
Thank you. So I think this is the the quote everyone remembers out of this is those who live by the sword will die by the sword. Um, you, of course, do not carry a sword as a chaplain, but I know you have closer encounters with it than most of us. So, what are your reflections on this passage from where you sit?
So it was probably 12 years ago now when I was in my first battalion, which is kind of an army chaplain's way of saying in my first call. And I spoke on this passage, and I had a soldier pull me aside afterwards and say, I can tell you, chaplain, I've been downrange, and I can tell you that Jesus's words are absolutely true, that all who take up the sword will die by the sword. And that has certainly been my experience. A part of me died when I was downrange. And it struck me then, as it still strikes me now, especially as we hear the first reading for the first Sunday of Lent, that Jesus's words are true. They don't appear necessarily to be true, because there are lots of people who go to war and who don't die and they come home. That Jesus's words are true even though they appear not to be, as opposed to the serpent's words, which appear to be true even though they are not, when the serpent says, you shall not die, but you shall be like God, knowing good from evil. And so the serpent lies by twisting the truth of the one command that God had given, because there was a way in which Adam and Eve did in fact die when they took of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And so the inverse happens then in this garden, the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus's words are true, that when you take up the sword, you die by the sword. And the way of Jesus is the way of peace. Put your sword, return your sword to its place. Could I not appeal to my Father, and at once he would send me 12 legions of angels? As I recall my history, Rome had 10 legions, and they were mighty and feared at its height when the Gospels were written. And 12 legions of angels could probably conquer the whole world. But that is not the way of Jesus. Also, not the way of the angels. When the angels show up in the Gospels, they don't annihilate, they announce the birth of Christ. They don't massacre, they minister to Jesus. in the wilderness and in the garden. Um,
Can I ask you to slow your roll for just a second?
oh, sorry.
Um, yeah, carried away with the angels, but I actually had a question. You said that even though the serpent tells them uh, they will not die, that they do. Could you explain what you mean? Like I'm 6 years old.
Oh, sorry. Yes, Pastor James. I mean, so they die spiritually, and that's very important that they die spiritually because sorry, there's this new feature on AI controls my Zoom, and so when I raised my thumb as I was counting, there's a little countdown at the bottom of the Zoom now, and that I raised my thumb on the Zoom. Apparently, I gave a thumbs up. Anyway, they died spiritually. First of all, their primary relationships, God, each other, and the creation, have all been fundamentally altered. And then they actually will physically die. So the serpent's words, they don't die the moment they touch the fruit, possibly a fig. They don't die the moment they eat the fruit, possibly a fig, but they do die both spiritually and eventually physically when after
So,
they, tried to usurp God's place.
so the
Oh,
parallel to that then is that not everyone physically dies by the sword, but you think it has a spiritual effect of death, sword bearing upon individuals and upon our culture. Is that what you would say?
I mean, you took it a step further than I did with the culture, but yeah, I absolutely think that's true. It is interesting because we'll get to the recommendation in a minute, but I just finished a book on the Korean War, and to hear the reflections of the soldiers who came out of the not Vietnam, Korean War, to hear the reflections of the soldiers who came out of the Korean War, they definitely, some of them will say things like, "I left a part of myself in Korea." Um, but there is a way in which they died spiritually. And yes, uh, we collectively are changed. We die as a culture when we call upon our service members to do those things.
Yeah, I really resonate with that, and I think we don't often spend enough time about how our choices change us, um, whether that's bearing the sword. Um, I'm almost connecting this in my head that this might seem off the wall, but um, one of the arguments against slavery that people had was not just that it's bad for the slaves, but it is bad for the slave owners because it creates a mindset. And obviously, we need soldiers. This is in no way to disparage soldiers, but the fact that we rely so much upon our military and upon our sword and upon violence, I think there's just no question that shapes our children even from a very young age. So I think we think of things as tools we can control, but sometimes they actually shape us.
And in ways we don't always even think about or understand. So if I can harken back to the news from, oh my goodness, I guess maybe it's been 4 years now, when the Houthi rebels were disrupting the shipping lines, and it was the United States Navy who reopened the shipping lines. Like, the world's commerce depends on the United States Navy. Like, just the stuff you get in the store or order from Amazon depends on the United States Navy for the free flow of commerce. It's unbelievable. Um, and it's embedded, like, yes, culturally, but also economically in ways that can be hard to know, see, and understand sometimes.
So in a world of so many swords, what is a Messiah to do?
Die. I'm
But
not. I'm not.
he did not bear the sword, Pastor Chris.
I'm not. And I'm not trying to be funny, right? Like, so he does not. He does not take up a sword, but he dies by our sword. He does not call upon the 12 legions of angels, and in fact, by knowing his place, right? Adam and Eve tried to usurp the place of God. He knows his place, and his place is to fulfill the scriptures, and his place is to take our place in some ways. I realize that's one of the atonement theories, but his place is to defeat death, not by violence, because that's usually how we do it, right? His place is to defeat death by dying.
Well, that is a sobering reflection, to be sure.
Well, I mean, and not to
But
be
true. Go ahead.
true, and it's a sobering text, right? Like
Yeah.
it's a sobering time of the church year. It's a sobering story, and what one of our mutual professors, we were several years apart in seminary, but one of our mutual professors would say that this was the plan from the beginning. It wasn't that the father turned to the son and said, "Hey, what are you doing on Friday?"
Yeah.
Um,
And
yeah,
I would also say we ultimately can't tell this story apart from our faith, which is that Jesus's ways look like death and lead to life. Our ways look like life, I'll defend myself and lead to death. Um, that's a lesson that we have to learn over and over again.
and I'm so glad you said that, and I'm so glad you said it that way, because part of my concern as a pastor, as a chaplain, when I hear about people using words like talking about self-defense, that is a right, that is a legal defense. But I wish that a part of that conversation was what it does to the person who is defending him or herself. Because I would defend myself, I would defend my family, and that's understandable. That's, if you will, all things are lawful, but I promise you, it is not beneficial.
Yeah, I think we believe perfect love casts out fear, and if we find that we have a fortress mentality, uh, we might want to examine that, and in some cases that might actually mean consulting a therapist or someone who can help us because there might be good reasons why we have that mentality, but it's not. Um, Jesus calls us to models and gives himself to a different way, and continues to be both a challenge and good news to all of us.
It's yeah, it's sorry. You talk about the fortress, or I maybe might use the castle mentality.
Castle, sure.
That's um well, it depends on the point you're trying to make, whether you talk about a mighty fortress or the castle doctrine, right? But um it's interesting that you should say that, because that extends beyond the use of physical violence, right? To keeping people out of our lives because we're
Right,
afraid of people.
right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you have certainly given us a lot to think about for this bonus reflection, and it's just a bonus, so I don't want to overwork you. But
Well, I appreciate your thoughtfulness there, Pastor
yeah,
John.
yeah, yeah. There are overtime regulations, but uh, I think you wanted to share a recommendation with us. So care to share?
I mean, I would be remiss if I didn't recommend Starfleet, Star Trek Starfleet Academy, which is currently streaming on Thursday nights, on Paramount, on Thursdays on Paramount Plus. Um, I am a Trekkie. I do love Star Trek. However, having said that, um, I just enjoy like reading and learning stuff. So, like I said, I just finished a book on the Korean War called "The Coldest Winter," and it could be a lot to take in. And he gives a lot of background on geopolitics. Um, so it's not for, I realize it's not for everybody, but I didn't know much about the Korean War before I read this book, and now I know a lot more than I did.
And
Um,
that is a part of the world that has never recovered from the bearing the sword that was supposed to fix everything as well. Like it's a literal manifestation of Jesus' words. There is
yeah,
still a DMZ. There are still nuclear threats and missiles to this day.
to this day. Um, and now I just finished that book, and I'm a part of an online science fiction book club. Just for those of you who think I am only Star Trek, no, that is not true. I like science fiction in many, many forms. And I'm currently listening to Project Hail Mary. I think the author's name is Andy Weir. The narrator's doing a great job, and I'm thoroughly enjoying the book. It's sort of a science fiction mystery. You don't exactly know what's going on when the book opens. So, and I understand there's a movie coming out. Ryan Gosling, maybe? I don't know. I'm not into pop culture, so
We
other
we
things.
don't have a fact check team unless the Senate's doing it for us. So You get what you yeah, you get what you get and you don't throw a fit, as my son's dance teacher always tells him. And on that note, Pastor Chris Laughlin, thank you. You have fulfilled your obligation, your duty, and your joy to our program. And we wish all of our viewers a blessed Lent and invite you to enter the the mystery, the challenge, and the promise of Holy Week.
Amen, Pastor James.